a field of study. Therefore, if the methodology is novel, therefore that is your um, share to the body of knowledge, and therefore what you're doing could be considered an academic research. The good thing about Michael J. Cutts calling methodology as recipe is that it gives us the um, somehow notion or a clue to how we are supposed to write a good methodology part of our research paper. In a sense that um, Michael J. Cutts called it recipe because, like a recipe, a methodology also is a step-by-step process. Like a recipe, a methodology is also a systematic process. But the good insight that calling it recipe gives um, to methodology is the fact that our recipe happens in the chronological order. Therefore, it gives us a clue on how to write uh, the the methodology part of our research paper. The thing is, most of my students in research would really ask sometimes because they they are having a hard time on how to write their methodology. But if you consider a methodology a recipe and making sure that all the things that you included in the methodology are step by step systematic and at the same time chronological in order, then uh, calling it a recipe is a perfect guide for you to write a methodology. So that's the reason why I was able to finish the book of Michael J. Katz, because I like the different ideas that he is sharing when it comes to writing a research paper or a manuscript, academic research paper or a manuscript. As per the book, a meaningful scientific statement includes an observation and its recipe, and the standard form for recording meaningful scientific statements is the scientific research paper. Writing a paper should be an active part of your research. If you wait until your studies are finished before you begin to write, you will miss a powerful tool. Writing a paper can be an integral part of observational science. And there are important things that we should note when we are writing a paper. Actually, two. The other one is just part of the process. Um, that it is important for us to understand the fact that an academic research paper utilizes precise language. It is not an essay. It is not a literary work. Therefore, it is important for us to utilize precise language. That within this stereotype format, the language of scientific paper aims to be clean, clear, and unemotional. Science avoids colorful words. In science, descriptions must be precise, recipes must be complete, data must be exact, logic must be transparent, and conclusion must be clearly stated. A lot of students would has the tendency to put their opinion in the academic research paper. That is not allowed if we would be strict in the rule of writing um, an academic research paper, because at the end of the day, our academic research paper must utilize precise language and must be void of personal emotion. Second is that a scientific research paper must have a single clear direction. Beyond a stereotype format and transparent language, a scientific paper also needs clarity of direction. Your entire paper should point inexorably towards its conclusion. Therefore, as you write, point the way for your reader and remove tangents and digressions. Itong second element is most of the time the challenge of my former students when they are writing a paper. Most of my comments in their paper are um, discussions are illogical or discussions are incoherent. Um, I think it is important for us to be conscious about the logic and the coherence of our discussion in order for the readers of our paper to understand it clearly. So, um, my my usual tip for my students when writing an academic research paper, in order to ensure that their academic research paper has logic and coherence all throughout the paper, they need to create their own outline. The they need to create first the outline of discussion of different topics and subtopics to make sure that their discussion would be logical and coherent, and at the same time that their discussion would not be redundant, that they would not be discussing something that they already discussed, etc. So there. If you wanted to have a single clear direction, or if you wanted to make sure that your paper has a discussion that is logical and coherent, make sure that you write your outline first of the topics that you will be discussing before you write the actual paper. And it must be reviewed and made available to others. A scientific paper should be accessible to others to submit. So submit your paper to a peer-reviewed journal. But in our case, I will be the one reviewing and grading your submission. So in the topic scientific words, sentences, and paragraphs, as I said a while ago, it is important for us to write with precision when writing a research paper. The goal is to write a paper that is easy to understand. Scientific prose is judged by how well it defines the details of the observations that you have made. Scientific papers have a stereotype format so that there are no distractions from their contents. Likewise, scientific prose should be formulaic and plain. To write precisely is to write without adornment. It helps to remember that your goal is to speak plainly, to write clean, straightforward sentences without hedging, say what you mean directly. Some students have the tendency to think that if they are utilizing highfalutin words, that they will have better grades. But when it comes to scientific writing, that is not the case, because in scientific writing, what you need to do is to make sure that the reader or the one reading your paper would understand whatever it is that you are saying clearly. And using highfalutin words would just be an obstacle to that goal of yours, that your paper could be understood by the people who is reading it. So, if we, if you could, when you are writing a scientific research paper, the best way for us to make sure that our discussion is really precise is if we use adjectives or we use numbers as adjectives. So, as said here, numbers have just the right properties for scientific writing. Numbers are precise, objective, unambiguous, and without emotional undertones. Because quantifiable adjectives are ideal descriptors in science, try to redefine all your adjectives as numbers. Even the inherently subjective adjective painful should be set as a number on a scale quantifying how painful, as is done in most hospitals, from 0 to 10. So if you could make sure that if you could, after all what we are doing in MSECE, in the ECE, the research that we are doing are quantitative research. Most of the things that we are experimenting on are measurable. We could utilize numbers as our adjectives. But if in case that is not the case, then we could use objective words. Of course, you cannot write with numbers alone. When quantifiable words are not available, you should use as precise and objective a vocabulary as possible. In science, the rule is to define all your words. One habit to ensure a good scientific text is to weed out or replace vague and subjective terms such as expressions with no clear limits. A lot of students are using a lot of expressions with no clear limits when they are writing a research paper. So it is important for us to be conscious if our statements are vague or clearly has no limits, and make sure that we could convert it into something that is objective and precise. Words of personal judgment. After all, a research paper must be void of your emotions. Words that are only fillers and casual, colorful catchwords and phrases must not be um, part of your scientific research paper. Usually my students would ask me what tense they are to use when writing a research. The real answer is it depends. One is when you can use present tense for generalities. The present tense indicates general knowledge and general principles, meaning most of our accepted facts and theories are discussed in the present tense, while the results of your own experiments, the experiments that you conducted or the testing that you conducted for your research are discussed in past tense, especially if you yeah, especially if you are done with your research and you are writing your full manuscript already. One challenge of engineering students is to write correct sentence and correct paragraph. Um, yeah, for how many years I'm teaching methodology and thesis subject, and usually my observation is that a lot of students doesn't know how to write a correct sentence, a sentence or a paragraph properly. And that's what's good in this book by Dr. Katz, that it's really specific on the ways or the correct way of writing a sentence and a paragraph. So how do we write a sentence and paragraph for a scientific research paper? One is, in a research paper, each paragraph should contain one main idea, and the space between paragraphs should be like taking a mental breath. Picture the text as idea number one, breathe, idea number two, breathe. Most people absorb ideas in small chunks, and scientific paragraphs are those small absorbable chunks. The ideal size for paragraph is 3 to 4 sentences, and 5 sentences are about the upper limit. I hope all of you would remember this, that the ideal size for a paragraph is just 5 sentences. And more than that would be too long for a paragraph. Because after all, supposedly when you are reading a text, you would not stop unless you cannot pause until the end of a paragraph. Of course, you could pause a little bit when a period, but the thought supposedly is connected with one another, and you would only have a long pause when during the end of a paragraph. So if you have find that you have written 6 or more sentences without allowing for a mental breath, then go back and break your writing into smaller chunks, like what they did in this paragraph. Dr. Katz is a medical doctor. He is a surgeon. Therefore, most of his examples in this book are in the medical field, including this example of the original paragraph, wherein the discussion is this: to keep all the cells in the body are coordinated and working toward the same metabolic goals, the body uses hormones. Hormones are chemicals that are carried throughout the bloodstream. giving the same message to all the cells they meet. For sugar metabolism, the hormone messenger is insulin. Insulin is a protein that is made in the beta cells, which are clustered inside the pancreas. When the level of glucose in the blood becomes too high, the beta cells secrete insulin molecules into the bloodstream. Thus, after a meal, the pancreas puts a large dose of insulin in the blood. The message that insulin then transmits throughout the body is it's time to absorb, use, and store glucose. And that paragraph is too long. Therefore, we could cut it into two paragraphs, wherein the first paragraph discusses about the hormone and what it does in the body, and at the same time cite an example or a type of a hormone. Then on the second paragraph, it made the insulin, which is the subtopic in the first paragraph, to be the main topic of the second paragraph, making the paragraph shorter than the original part.